Well, because you never fail to amaze me, I have a trivia question for you this morning. The smiles I'm receiving right now. Do any of you know what happened on August 21st, 2017? August 21st, 2017. Warren. It's like I said, you never fail to amaze me. Yes, yeah. So there was a total solar eclipse, and the total eclipse path went all the way across the United States. It started in Oregon, and it exited in South Carolina. And Sunday after worship, we were worshiping out in the Grove. Darlene and Paige and I had the car all loaded up, and we headed out of town to Beatrice, Nebraska. Now, Beatrice, Nebraska is, I'm going to guess it's about an hour south of Lincoln. And we camped for the night, and we were there because Beatrice was right along the path. There was going to be about 160 seconds of the total eclipse. And I cannot tell you how excited we were on this adventure. Guess what it did that Sunday night? It started to rain. It poured. Woke up the next morning, it was totally overcast. So I started doing this whole thing. It's been fun to be with my wife, and it's been fun to be with my daughter. And we got to camp, and we got to share some good meals together. And the next morning just socked in. And pretty discouraged. But guess what happened? About 10 minutes before the eclipse was to happen, the spot where the sun was opened up, and we could see the sun. Now, a total solar eclipse does not start out that way. At first what happens is there's just a little bit of a notch in the sun, and you wear these pretty dorky cardboard glasses with these really dark lenses so you can look at the sun. And over the next few minutes, the moon started to cover the sun, and before long the sun was just a crescent. And at first, it didn't seem like that big of a deal. You know, it's just, it's kind of interesting. But things changed very quickly. All of a sudden, the sun was almost totally covered up, and all of a sudden, the wind started to blow. All of a sudden, all the street lights popped on, and I don't know if they were cicadas or crickets started to chirp. This is in the late morning. I'm going to guess it was somewhere between 11 and 12, and then all of a sudden you had this total solar eclipse. It only lasts for about 160 seconds, but it was amazing. Sometimes, like at dusk, have you ever seen it when the light is just right, how everything kind of glows? The colors pop, and that's what it was like, and it was absolutely amazing. And after about 2 minutes and 40 seconds, it was over. All of a sudden, the lights went back. The street lights went off again, and the insects quit their chirping, and all of a sudden the cloud cover came over again, and it was time to go home. Well, there's a man named David Barron, and David Barron has a TED Talk, and he is a solar eclipse evangelist. He tells this story. He was a reporter for National Public Radio. He was interviewing a guy about a solar eclipse, and the guy said, you just have to see it at some point in your life. And this guy was so compelling, David Barron ended up going to Aruba to see the next total solar eclipse. Aruba, why not? I mean, I don't know that you can necessarily go wrong. But the thing is, in Beatrice, Nebraska, it's about once every 400 years that the total eclipse is going to happen. But if you're willing to jump on an airplane and travel around, you can see eclipses, I'm going to guess, every couple years, something like that. And David Barron has gone to Germany and Australia, and I think he's seen like 20-some of these total solar eclipses. And he's an evangelist. He is one who goes around and talks about how mystical it is, how it brings you into the state of awe, how it connects you with others that are sharing that experience. He talks about how there's not only physical phenomena, but there's also this social phenomena that happens when you share this experience with someone else. And I'll never forget being with that group in Beatrice, Nebraska, because all of a sudden when the sun was covered, people started to clap and cheer, and it was just this beautiful experience. The thing is David Barron understands that when there's something that is important to you, something that brings you joy, something that brings you awe, the best way to share that, or to share that love with someone, is to share the experience. I want to share with you three different stories about people who have shared their love with me. The first is Daryl. Daryl loves to trap shoot. I am not a gun guy. I don't know anything about guns, but Daryl wanted to take me out and have me experience what trap shooting is like, because it's a sport that he loves. It's a sport that he competes with. So one day Daryl picked me up here at church, and we drove down to the gun club, and he walked me all through this activity that he loves. He taught me the terminology, the nomenclature that you need to know. He gave me all of the safety instructions that one needs to know. He taught me about how do you hold the gun and how do you find your stance and all of the shooting angles. And the absolute joy that he shared this with me was just a wonderful gift that day. When I couldn't hit anything, he helped coach me up and simplify things. And you know what? Before we were through, I would occasionally hit one of those little clay discs as it was still in the air. It was fun to share that experience with Daryl and to be coached up and all of that. But what made that a special day for me was Daryl's absolute love of this activity and the joy that it brought to him as he was sharing it with me. I've got another friend named Rob. Rob loves to fly fish. It is one of his favorite things. And he loves to share fly fishing with others. He's a fly fishing evangelist. It happens in a number of ways. Part of it is he has extra equipment. So when he can take other people out and he can have the equipment for them to learn this activity. Rob has gone to elementary schools and taught classes where young students can learn how to fly fish. Rob works with veterans and teaches them how to fly fish, because there's something about being outside, there's something about the rhythms, the activity of fly fishing that is just relaxing, and it brings people to this different headspace that can be quite meaningful for them. But Rob absolutely loves to share that activity. So here's the thing that you need to know about both Daryl and Rob. They will not try to argue you into believing that their activity is the best activity. They will not make long cases about why trap shooting is better than baseball, or why trap shooting is better than some other activity. Because for them, it's not about trying to argue or convince, but rather it's about sharing something that they love. One of Darlene's and my favorite stories in our family is we were on a hike, and our youngest child, Jacob, all of a sudden, somewhere along this hike, stopped. And he said, is there anything this family ever does besides go on hikes? And the reason he said that is because every single vacation we go on is a vacation where we go hiking. It does not matter where we go. We somehow, even if it's like going to visit, New York City, we pick spots along the way where we stop and we go on hikes. If we're in New York City, we go find the High Line Trail and we hike that. It's the thing we do. And it was funny to see the outrage as he confronted this with this reality of this the only thing our family does is go hiking. Well, guess what Jacob does now? He's 23 years old. On every vacation Jacob goes on, not with his parents, just by himself, it almost always includes hiking. It's just something that he grew up with. It was something that Darlene and I loved and that we shared with him and our other children. And even when he wasn't quite sure about whether it was his thing, he was convinced that it was something that brought his parents great joy, and it was a love that they shared with him, and it's a love that he now shares with his parents. So this month we've been talking about what does it mean to have a witness? What does it mean to be able to tell our story? And we've talked about how part of what it means to tell our story is we need to understand our why. And last week I gave you a homework assignment to think about your faith story. To think about why is this thing, this Christian faith, so important to you that on this Sunday, February 16th, you got yourself up and fed and out the door, and you're committed yourselves to gathering as the community of faith, as the body of Christ. Why is this faith so important to you that you're willing to share your financial resources? Why is this faith so important to you that you're willing to come on Wednesday evenings and practice and rehearse as a choir, or you're willing to put together the PowerPoint presentation that leads us in worship, or you're willing to be an usher or a small group leader? What is it about this faith that you have committed yourself to? What is your why? Pastor Kelly read for us a passage of Scripture from Paul's first letter to the Thessalonians. And in there, Paul shares his why. He shares this deep love that he has of Jesus Christ and the commitment he brings to sharing that faith with others. And he talks about how he does that out of his deep care, his deep love of people. And he talks about how he makes a total offering of himself in this work. And that he tries to do it with integrity. He tries to do that work with authenticity. And he shares good news. He shares God's love with others. Part of what we need to understand is why does the faith, the Christian faith in life, mean so much to us? It's hard to tell our faith story if we are not clear about our why. So I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about why, and I'd like to begin with our church's why. Many of you are familiar with our church's why because we put it on the front of the worship bulletin every single Sunday. We talk about how you are called, we're inviting people to come as you are and you'll be welcomed. We talk about how what we're called to as a community of faith is to be a people who are sharing God's love. Pastor Kelly in her sermon this morning, or not in her sermon, I mean in her prayer this morning, talked about how we are a people who are called to love. We read that God so loved the world, and we understand that as God's people, we also love the world. And it's one of our deepest commitments, is being a people who tells others, come as you are, that you will be welcomed. And we will seek to share God's love with you. I'll never forget in worship in my previous church, there was, you know how I can usually find most of you on a Sunday morning because I know where you sit. I mean, people are like, looking for so-and-so, and I was like, oh, I know where we can find them, because you're people of habit. You've got some worship patterns about where you sit. But one of the worship patterns in my previous church is the pew where both Ray and Matt sat. And one of the things is Ray and Matt couldn't be much more different from one another. Ray was the superintendent of schools for the Edina school system. Ray would always come to worship in a collared shirt and a tie and a jacket or a suit. Ray was, near retirement age, and he was this dignified-looking man. And then there was Matt. Matt was normally in a t-shirt and jeans. Matt was quite young. Matt didn't graduate high school. And yet both of them knew that there was a place for them in God's church and that they were persons that were welcome to come as they are. So one of the most basic affirmations we say is, come as you are, you're going to be welcomed, as we seek to share God's love. But then we say, be who you are, because you will be celebrated. Because we are a community that is committed to honoring the sacred worth and dignity of all of God's people. And we seek to be crystal clear about that commitment. And then finally we say, explore where you are, you'll be encouraged. Because we understand that this journey that we're on my journey is different than your journey, and your journey is different than your neighbor's journey. And yet this journey we are is a process of formation and reformation, that we gather as a community of people who have traditional faiths, and as people who are skeptics, as people who are seekers. We find ourselves in different places in this journey, but we understand that as a community of faith, we are called to be a people that encourages one another. Because each and every one of us has a story to tell, and each and every one of us has our own unique why. And so if we are going to be a people who have this witness, we need to understand what our why is. And then, like Paul, we need to share that in ways that are authentic, ways that have integrity, in ways that share the joy that we've experienced. And like with anything we love, we don't argue someone into something. Rather, we share the joy and the meaning and the love that we've experienced in that. Some of you know that there's something about who I am, just kind of the way I am wired. It's not something that has... It's something I've struggled with, and that is there's a piece of me that really seeks other people's approval. There's a piece of me that where my own identity, my own self-identity, is tied up in how others see me. And that manifested itself in a number of ways. I'm the oldest of 3 boys, was raised by 2 parents who are school teachers, and there was this piece of me that just identified what made me lovable was me being a good son to my parents. What made me acceptable was me being a good student for my teachers. What gave me some sense of identity was being a good athlete to my coaches. And the thing is finding your identity in what you do or what other people say about you or what other people or what you have is a terrible place to find your identity. And I reached this point as a young adult where there was neither grace nor good works in my life. And it was this dark, lonely place. But here's the thing. I had been raised in a church where God's grace was preached and taught. And even though as a child and as a teenager, all of those pieces didn't come together for me, they did as a young adult when I needed it the most. Because when I was in this dark place where there was neither works nor grace, I had this ineffable moment where God's Spirit broke into my life, and I had this epiphany that what made me acceptable, what made me lovable, what made me the person I was, wasn't what I did, wasn't what other people said about me, wasn't what I had, but it was rather that I was a beloved child of God who was of sacred worth and dignity, and who was loved and who was known. And that epiphany, that breakthrough, that experience of being born from above or being born again or however you might want to sing about it or talk about it, was what set me free to new life in Jesus Christ. It's what set me free to help know God's grace and to know the new life that comes through that grace. That's an important part of my story about my why, about why I do what I do, why it's important for me to share this good news of God's love with all people. But it's also especially important for me to do it in the church. It's another important part of my why. Because it's within the community of faith where we are known and where we are loved and where we are encouraged that I've discovered that transformation can be nurtured and proclaimed and experienced. One of the gifts of being a pastor is you get to hear many people's faith stories. And I have heard the stories of how important this faith community has been to people who have found this church. In a few minutes, we're going to be welcoming some new people that are going to be joining our faith community. And it was a blessing to hear their own experience of this church, their own experience of what it meant to come as you are and to be welcomed, to be who you are and to be celebrated, and to explore where you are and be encouraged. This is a community that is committed to those values, and it's changing lives. My hope for you is that you will continue to do that important work about what is your why. How can you share your why with others in ways that are authentic, in ways that reflect who you are, and in the ways that reflect the joy that you know through your Christian faith. And it's in that we can tell our story and we can have a witness. Amen. I'd invite you to stand as we join together